What keeps you podcasting for a whole year? Well, for me, it's been the listeners, and today is the anniversary show of the Blogcentric podcast, and I've decided to hand it over to them. Welcome to Spiderworking's Blogcentric podcast, a podcast about blogging. Hello and welcome to episode 52 of the Blogcentric podcast. Yes, it's a year since I started this little podcast and I've had a ball. And I have learned loads, not just about podcasting, but about blogging. The more I blog, the more I talk about blogging, the more I learn. To my delight, some people actually listen as well. Yes, people like you. So this week, I thought I'd introduce you to some of those listeners. I thought I would hand over the show to them. So I've talked to 9 people over the last few weeks, and I've asked them to share details about their blog and what they've picked up from listening to the podcast. So I hope you enjoy listening to these new voices, and I hope you'll go and check out their blogs as well. You'll find out more about the 9 bloggers featured, the resources they share, over on the show notes, and you'll find those at spiderworking.com/52. Over to the bloggers. You're listening to Blogcentric from Spiderworking.
My name is Colin Baker and I'm the Managing Director of Whabang Social Media, which is a digital marketing company focusing mainly on social media, helping businesses manage their social media profiles, get new business through advertising, paid advertising, email marketing, landing pages, stuff like that. And we also provide social media and digital marketing training. I've listened to Blogcentric for a long time now. Amanda's a great resource of training and tips and guides on how to improve your business blogging and how to gain extra exposure online. I would say to list all the things I've learned from it would take too long, but I find the how-to material very good. For example, building my own blog, I didn't have any tech experience really in that sense, so I used a lot of the content on the podcast to help me do that. So the beginner's guide to creating your blog, the different plugins to use on WordPress, such as Yoast, have been very helpful to my blog and give me a real boost in what I'm doing. And then also Amanda's knowledge of the different social media platforms, which is the area I work in, but it's also great to learn from other people who are doing this as well, and her experiences and what she said on Blogcentric, particularly about Facebook Live videos, have been really helpful for growing our business, but also for us helping growing other businesses as well. To find me online, you can check out our website, www.whabang.ie. Whabang is spelled Whabang. You can reach out to me on Twitter, Whabang Tweets. We're on Facebook, and I'm on LinkedIn, so Colin Baker on LinkedIn would be great. We also have a Facebook group, Social Bang, which is to kind of help businesses and people improve their social media marketing and digital marketing. It's a completely free group, and there's lots of great advice and tips in there.
Hello, my name is Christina, and I'm the owner of Dear Passerby, which is a blog about tech, TV and travel. When I started my blog, it was only September last year, and I spent a lot of time looking at what I wanted the name to be, the logo, and I suppose I had an idea in my head as to what I wanted it to look like. So I set it up in September, and then I suppose I put in a lot of work in terms of what it looked like and trying to set it up. But then I kind of just weaned a little, because I just assumed that once I set it up that, you know, I just post up a blog post and then automatically all these lovely readers would automatically come to my website. So I kind of left it go for a while, and then it wasn't until April this year that I had a look at it again, and I realised that the actual website itself, it wasn't great. So that's, I suppose, where spider working came in was the podcasts were really helpful in terms of some of them in relation to the style guide, like episode 9. I actually had a re-look at my whole website, and I just realised that it was very childish looking and it wasn't very professional. And I think episode 9 of the podcast really helped. And I even go back to that now and again, just I suppose refresh myself in terms of what the style of my website looks like. I think especially things like Canva are really good, where I would have used Photoshop a lot, whereas I find now Canva is a lot easier to do and it gets things done a lot quicker. Also creating a mood board on Pinterest is very good, which were all things that were in episode 9 of the podcast, which were really helpful. I suppose the other aspect that I found really useful from the Blogcentric podcast was SEOs. I absolutely knew nothing about SEOs, and I think that if you're a person who doesn't know much about it, episode 12 and episode 23 were really helpful to me. I think as well the other aspect was my blog post titles, which you covered in your podcast in episode 19, which I found really helpful because it was something I didn't really think about. It was just, I just threw up any all title. It was a case of just thinking up something as I go, whereas now I kind of look at what the heading is and whether it has an emotional response, and coming up with a few other headings as well that would be quite good in terms of promoting it on different social networking sites. You can find me online on my website is www.dearpasserby.com, or on my Facebook or Twitter is facebook.com/dearpasserby. Twitter is the same, twitter.com/dearpasserby, or Instagram is instagram.com/dearpasserbyblog.
You're listening to Blogcentric from Spiderworking.
Hi, this is Dee Sewell from Green Side Up. I have a gardening eco lifestyle blog, but at my website I would be a community garden tutor and consultant. Congratulations, Amanda, on your anniversary. I've been listening into your podcast for some time now, and I've picked up many tips, more than I can remember off the top of my head actually, but the most recent one was the call to action. I've been blogging for 6 years I think now, and you still don't remember everything every time you hit the send button. And recently I published a post and hadn't put a call to action at all. Listened to the podcast, gave me that reminder, and I was able, this last blog post, to, I think, produce the best call to action I've done in a long while. As a result of the reminder, I went in and added a page of how to contact me, all the different workshops that I'm running at the moment, and I was able to add that to my blog post and send people off in that direction. So another tip that I picked up from one of Amanda's podcasts was to put together a kind of a mood board. I realised that I'm on several different social media sites. We've got the website, and my colours weren't matching. So as a result of listening to the episode, I was able to find the colours that I'm using on my website, and I've now reproduced those all around my social media channels and on my letterheads, etc. So for the whole branding exercise, so that was really useful. I'm sure there are lots more things, but for now, those are my two top tips to listen out for. You can find me on greensideup.ie is the website. Greensideup.ie, Dee's vegetable blog. I'm also on Twitter as GreensideUpVeg. You can find me on Facebook as GreensideUp.
Hi there, I'm Lisa Kellner-Williams. I'm the content lady over at Agora Pulse. Our blog is agorapulse.com/blog. And I have to admit that Amanda's podcast is the only podcast I listen to. There's tons of great content in every episode. The one that I've used the most is the one about revitalizing old content. I've recently spent a lot of time prioritizing content that appears in the top 10 search results, but I liked the tack that her podcast took. It was based on a Jeff Bullis article that kind of lurk underneath, so those that rank from 11 to 30. So I'm starting to work on those, giving them a new life. What I'm trying to concentrate on is first keyword density, not going overboard, but making sure that the keywords we want to rank for are, in the alt tags, maybe earlier in the stories, working on internal and external links, because some of these articles are quite old and they're referring to old research and older articles where there's new stuff in both internal and external sites. And then also, if we needed to, give them a little extra boost in length, because as Amanda said, and I agree, Google definitely gives preference to longer articles. I'm trying to make articles now at least 1,000 words. So if I can make them reach it with good content, I do. And so I'm really appreciative for this to just get me thinking more about, again, those 11 to 30 ranked articles and getting them the boost that they need. So thanks so much, Amanda, and keep up the great work, because again, without you, I wouldn't be listening to any podcast at all. You can find me online at Agorapulse, agorapulse.com/blog. You can find me, Lisa Kellner-Williams. I tweet about social media and all sorts of things at Kellner-Williams. That's KALNERWILLIAMS. And I look forward to connecting with you online.
Hi, I'm Elaine, the Smart VA, and I started listening to the podcasts probably in the early days, and I've really loved almost every episode, the ones that I managed to listen to, and I love the layout of the post, and I always listen to the podcast first, and then I read the post, and then I go off and I check any links, or I implement the tips and tricks that Amanda is giving. The Facebook group is also a great place to remind me to listen to the podcasts. The one that really stuck out for me, I think, was the layouts to do with WordPress in particular, but blogging in general. And I picked up some very good tips about not adding too many sidebars onto the blog because of the post being read on a mobile. The headings one, I knew anyway about using the H1 and H2 and H3 tags, but it was a great reminder. And also to use opening paragraphs, which I think is really cool. And I have begun to do that as well. One other tip that I have found really of great benefit is actually making white space in the blog post itself. And that's shortening sentences, putting in blank lines, and actually getting people to scroll. And even I find as a reader as well, it's much easier to read a blog when you're scrolling down and reading a sentence at a time, rather than trying to read a huge, big block of text. Another couple of great tips I picked up from the various podcasts were revitalizing content, repurposing content. I took that a step further and actually used some exclusive content I had from an email newsletter that I did a couple of years ago, and I have found that hugely beneficial. Another one that came up for me was the security. Again, this would be to do with WordPress, but one big thing that came up was when you are authoring your blog posts, if you're using your admin, the problem is you can actually see what the username is for the WordPress login, and that became a great subject of discussion, and it actually provoked me to set up another user and use that for creating my pages and my blog posts. And maybe the last thing I really found of benefit was the various different call to actions that weren't just, comment and share and contact me for more details. One of my favorite ones actually is the tweet that you can add into your blog post, and all someone has to do is literally click on it, and it pops up with the tweet ready with the hashtag, and your Twitter username. And I think that's a really great way to get people to share your content without too much work. So they're my great tips from the Blogcentric podcast. I think that is quite difficult to say. I'm sure Amanda made that specifically a tongue twister. So for me, Elaine from the Smart VA, you can find me online at thesmartva.eu. And my Twitter is Elaine Rogers. I'm Elaine Rogers on LinkedIn as well. And my Facebook page is Facebook/The Smart Virtual Assistant. And I hope you get as much benefit from Amanda's Blogcentric podcast as I have in the past.
You're listening to Blogcentric from Spiderworking.
Hi, my name is Gavin Lawler. I have a tech blog and digital marketing blog called The Digital Dub. I first got to know Amanda through the Irish Bloggers group on Facebook, and then I quickly got to know about spiderworking.com after seeing numerous recommendations from other members of the group and from Amanda promoting it on social media. I'm a big fan of the spiderworking.com podcasts. I usually listen to them while I'm driving. There's so many brilliant tips and tricks and great advice that it was difficult to pick just one podcast to talk about. In the end, I think the one that stood out for me and that I learned a lot about was podcast number 40. So that was 12 podcast layout tips for keeping your readers happy. Now, I know a little bit about HTML and I know a little bit about SEO, so it was actually great to see so much stuff here that I didn't really know that much about, and stuff that I could easily implement into my own blog. The first great piece of advice given in this podcast is about sidebars. So a lot of older sites will have a sidebar on both sides, and I was never really a big fan of this. In fact, it turned me off having a sidebar altogether, so that's pretty much what I did at first. It was only when I listened to the advice given in the podcast that I realised the importance of having a sidebar, and also actually the importance to have just one sidebar. So now my blog has just one sidebar on the left with the text on the right. This helps me to share social media links and still maintains a good look for the blog. Another great piece of advice here I thought were points 4 and 5 regarding opening paragraphs, paragraph length and sentence length. So before I used to pay little attention to the length of the paragraphs or sentences. I'd often just worry more about what I was saying and stuff like keywords. But now I always try to use a great opening paragraph, and I try to keep paragraphs and sentences brief and to the point. This podcast also features a section on links. Now, I knew that links were important, and I also knew about hyperlinks. But the mistake I was making was just having my hyperlink as a single word. After listening to the podcast, I realised that this wasn't the best way to present my hyperlinks. I now try to make my hyperlinks appear as 3 or 4 words, so it's much easier for the people reading on mobile to see the links and also easier to click on them. There's so many other great tips in this podcast, but these were the ones that stood out for me. I've learned so many great tips, not from just this podcast, but many of the other podcasts at spiderworking.com. So if you're a new blogger or somebody who's a little bit more experienced, I'm sure you can find some great tips from listening to Amanda's podcasts. I certainly did. I'm Gavin Lawler, and you can read my blog at thedigitaldub.wordpress.com, or very soon I'll be on digitaldubmedia.ie. You can also get me on Twitter at dub_digital, or on Facebook at facebook.com/thedigitaldub.
My name's Kate McQuillan from Pet Sitters Island. You can visit our blog at petsittersisland.com/blog. The episode that I enjoyed most from the podcast is the one about revisiting old blog titles. I started blogging way back, and probably some of my older blogs are not that great. But actually, when I went into the statistics, it was quite clear that some of those old blogs were getting a lot of traffic. Some of them were actually in my top 10 trafficked blogs. But people weren't hanging around on the blog post for very long at all. They were kind of bouncing off pretty much straight away. because the content really wasn't that great. There was no call to actions. It wasn't laid out very well. It just didn't really look great. It wasn't doing anything for us. So what I did was I went back in, followed the guidelines in the podcast, rewrote the articles, added relevant call to actions, and just brought them up to the standard that we're at now with our blog. And what I started to see over time was that people were spending more time on the articles. They were going on to read other blog posts. And the whole thing just looked and felt more like, the image that we have for our brand and for our blog. So I think overall, like going back and doing that is something that everybody can do. We all get better over time. And, you can see much of an improvement in what you're working on. If you want to connect with us on social media, you'll find us on Facebook at Pet Sitters Island.
Hi, I'm Sinead from SineadSocial.com, and I help part-time bloggers set up and run their blogs with time-effective methods, tips and tricks. My favourite episode of the Blogcentric podcast is episode 3, which was the power of storytelling for your blog, where Amanda interviewed Eamon O'Brien. And in that episode, they talked about having a notebook on you at all times so you could record stories you heard or stories about your life. And I found that a total game changer. And another blogger, Senan Dolan from Oakleaf Adventure, had given me the idea to start every morning doing morning pages, where basically you just write whatever comes into your head, a couple of pages every morning. So I kind of combined those two ideas and I started writing stories about my life every morning. So I picked up a book called 642 Things to Write About Me by the San Francisco Writers Grotto. And basically that just generates like lots of personal examples and prompts that I can use every morning. So that notebook has become invaluable to me for my blog. So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sinead Social, or on my website, SineadSocial.com. And I'm also the admin at the Girl Crew Bloggers Facebook group, where we help females from all over the world network and talk about their blogs.
My name is Una Min Kavanagh, and I'm a journalist and a travel blogger with BeforeMyMamDies.com. And it's basically a travel blog with a difference is how I like to describe it. And it talks about everything from travel and all the things in between, from blogging tips and more somber stuff like dying matters. And my blog basically aims to be a resourceful, insightful, and in contrary to popular belief, for the sound of it, the dying matters section is a celebration of life rather than death. So I was really interested in listening to Amanda's podcast because I was starting a new blog from scratch. And even though I've been blogging for years, I wanted something that I could use as a go-to point. And so what I really loved is how informative it was without being boring. And this sounds like a really basic point, but I've actually listened to so many blog podcasts where the blogger doesn't actually transition very well to podcasting. But this is a perfect example of how a blog can easily move on to podcasting and even provide more value to the consumer or the reader. And so I feel like I'm going on the blogging and podcasting journey, and it's really handy because I can improve my blog along the way. So things I've done with my blog since is I've done a complete spring clean, which just takes a huge amount of time. And even though it's new, it's funny to look at all the things that actually have to be tweaked. And the biggest tip that actually took a lot of time was changing the name of your image before you upload it to your blog to include a key phrase. And I swear that was like the thing that took me the longest amount of time, but it was a really important thing to do. So when I heard that point and that tip, that was like my key thing to get cracking on. And since then, I've noticed a great difference in just people looking at the images. And even when the images don't display, it's really handy to get a description of what it is. So what I also love, I suppose, is that the podcast, like all the links are valid and all the information is valid. And there's no kind of hiding of information. It's very much about sharing and resourcefulness. And that's why I see it as an amazing resource, and I really love it as a podcast. So if you're interested in following me and my goings on, you can find me on Twitter at Una Kavanagh with a K, so UNAKAVANAGH, or you can follow the blog itself at BeforeMyMamDies.com, and that's MAM to reflect the Irishness of it, and you can find it on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and Snapchat.
You're listening to Blogcentric from Spiderworking. Before I sign off, don't forget, if you enjoy this podcast, please leave me a review over on iTunes or on Stitcher, because it means that more people will discover the podcast and it keeps me happy. If you believe in karma, you'll know that keeping me happy could mean that something good will happen to you too. Until next week, happy blogging. Blogcentric from Spiderworking is sponsored by We Teach Social, social media e-learning courses for small business. Find out more at weteachsocial.com.